Hello, Patriot. I say this as I sit here at the P on July 4th, 2026. I am here during an unprecedented heat wave in New York, which forced me to turn on my air conditioning. This is not a decision I make lightly, considering the budgetary constraints of a burgeoning writer, author, and podcaster, but I do have an animal that lives with me, and she deserves, as a senior cat, to not be burdened with an apartment hovering around 85 degrees. By the way, I did not know she was a senior cat until recently, but 12 years old qualifies. I also felt I would be disrespectful to not bathe her in cool air when I saw in my calendar that the 11th anniversary of the day I adopted her occurred this week as well. I have been enjoying some cool air too, because cooler heads prevail, and I love to prevail. Who am I anyway? I am Josh Bloom, the host of this podcast known as the 1,461 Days of Ignoring with Josh Bloom podcast, the weekly compilation of my daily 1,461 Days of Ignoring the Trump administration posts that originate on TikTok and are then reposted to YouTube, Instagram, and Substack. As I said, I am here at the P soaking up their AC while my AC continues to keep the temperature of my apartment in the mid-70s, even though I am not even there. Is that the kind of luxury that a man should celebrate on the 4th of July? You bet your ass. That is the kind of freedom I am talking about. Do you think my counterpart exists in North Korea, blithely running 2 window AC units in an apartment only occupied by a senior cat? I don't think so, and if he did exist, Kim would have sent him to a work camp a long time ago. To quickly update, I am no longer negotiating a second book contract because the misgivings I mentioned previously misgave. No one is at fault. It is simply one of those situations where you go on a first date and you feel like, could be okay, even though I know this is not what I want, but maybe I can make the best of it, and maybe that is what the challenge really is, and maybe I should not turn down opportunities, but I did. The upside is that I now have a working proposal for a book that I didn't even have in mind a month ago, and I am going to revise and flesh out the proposal more to my liking and pitch it to a publisher that I feel will be more appropriate for me and this book, kind of like how I handle my love life. Speaking of love, every time I think about how I am nearly 400 entries deep into this art project, which is how I choose to think about it in order to justify its existence, I question if this is an efficient use of my time. Never fear, when I begin to think that way, I realize that those thoughts are the point. This is an endurance exercise. Tolerating an unstable existence is an endurance exercise. The state of our country, as it is, with divisive attitudes and rhetoric at an all-time high as far as my 54 years here, presents an endurance exercise, and continuing with this project is a microcosm of that. This is the mindfulness I speak about, and from that I take the optimism required to maintain the hope that every person will benefit from having had what can seem in the moment as an impossible task. Also, it is kind of fun to figure out different ways to call Donald Trump a giant douche. Speaking of giant douche, let's get into 1,461 Days of Ignoring the Trump administration, days 390 through 396. This week on the show, on day 390, I talk about a completely cliche idea There's nothing to it but to do it. I actually believe this crap. I admire anyone's ability to embrace pure expression because I find it to be the best way to understand a person. The leader of the Trump administration is such a case. I do not admire his behavior, but I do admire that he behaves with seemingly zero self-regulation because it is so easy to figure him out if you try. Why would anyone want to try? Because he is making decisions every day that affect our lives, silly. On day 391, I congratulate the New York Knicks, who on that day were on their way to becoming NBA champions. Of course, they were denied one finals win at home, which meant that they could not claim the championship in NYC, and I choose to blame that on the fact that the leader of the Trump administration was in attendance at that game. He is a man seemingly devoid of self-awareness and does not realize that no one wants him here. But hey, we won anyway, and Spike Lee drives a Cybertruck, so he's no prize either. On day 392, I bring up the Destiny's Child classic, Say My Name, in reference to the removal of the leader of the Trump administration's name from the John F. Kennedy Memorial Center for the Performing Arts. I reflect on why I think moments like this can serve as small emotional victories during these difficult times, which is a healthier way to think about them as opposed to laughing at the brittle ego of a decaying man just because it feels good. On day 393, I wish the leader of the Trump administration a happy 80th birthday and reflect on how Marilyn Monroe once sang happy birthday to President Kennedy, while this current president will be watching sweaty, muscled men roll around together on his lawn. I go on to point out the irony of the leader of the Trump administration proclaiming that most people don't know that the word dumb has the letter B in it. On day 394, I shock the world by surprise announcing that I love the leader of the Trump administration before explaining that this is actually because I generally love the elderly. There is an innocence about them as they begin to embrace the inevitable that I find charming, and in the case of the dude in question, I see his desperate attempts to assert himself in the same light that I see a toddler managing to get to the toilet for the first time on their own. So cute. On day 395, I talk about a simple subject, my favorite color, which is green, and green just so happens to also be the color of algae. Of course, there is no way to discuss green without discussing Kermit the Frog and the Muppet I most relate to, Oscar the Grouch. But we quickly return to discussing algae, which now litters the once majestic Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool as a symbol of the mess we are in. On day 396, we end the week on a high note, as this day represents the completion of 27% of the 1,461 days. Unfortunately, I have to make it dark by bringing up the artistic curse associated with this number, the genesis of which is found in the amount of musicians that have died prematurely at the age of 27. I suppose that even though there is tragedy in this reality, at least the people in question are not around to witness what we are witnessing. Speaking of bearing witness, I watch YouTube as my primary TV-like source of entertainment because my cell phone plan gives me premium at a discounted price. I have no idea how I would ever go back to watching ads. But anyway, one of the chefs I occasionally check in with on YouTube is named Claire Saffitz. Claire became famous as part of the Bon Appetit kitchen before that brand fell into controversy and Claire and others went their own way. Claire cooks and bakes in her upstate New York kitchen, and because I notice way too much of everything, I noticed one day that the wall behind Claire's stove in her home kitchen had this little teeny tiny piece of paint that was missing. When I say tiny, I thought it might have been something on my screen, but it was indeed this little tiny white dot on the grayish brownish wall. Before I continue, I want to confess that much of what I am telling you is derived from my own mania. In fact, when I went to screenshot this wall as evidence to include for you to see, I realized this paint chip, or whatever it is, was not so noticeable after all. This caused me to question what the fuck is wrong with me. But anyway, again, if you want to see what I am talking about, please follow the YouTube link I have provided in the show notes. I just knew that Claire's camera person must be able to see this white dot, but that's not really the issue, because obviously anyone who is not me would say, "Who gives a fuck, Josh? You were fucking weird." But that is actually the reason I am pointing out the fact that I noticed this. It is because no one else in their right mind would. I don't have a problem with that paint chip. I don't think, what the hell is wrong here? I just need to know, what is the process? I am convinced that whoever did or did not see that white dot through the camera could see it now. This is the internet. The internet is forever. And even though Claire has 1.5 million YouTube followers, it doesn't mean there's a whole staff of people working in her kitchen, so I understand. But barring the possibility that these videos are shot with a camera sitting on a tripod that no one is looking through, unless the next video comes and that paint chip is fixed, I will have to wonder why it was not seen and remedied, or was it seen and ignored, or a third option, is it simply being glossed over entirely as part of the production, i.e., this is my home kitchen, and one little paint chip is charming. That said, I still want to know how this happened. Thank you for hearing me out. I'll see you on the other side. Day 390 of 1,461 days of ignoring the Trump administration. I am not a self-help guru. I'm just trying to help myself. There's nothing to it but to do it. That is really actually a philosophy that I believe in. We all possess within us a unique self, and expressing that unique self selflessly is the direct path towards being perceived like no one else. Frankly, this is why the leader of the Trump administration is so successful, quote unquote, in what he does. He is pure expression. I do not think there is any question that what we see from him is what he is. It is the perception of the person who sees that is the variable. In my opinion, people who have self-control, people who have empathy, people who are passionate about lifting up other people perceive the leader of the Trump administration as a goddamn pest. People who see themselves in him and his bizarre behavior, like, for instance, demolishing half of the White House for a ballroom that is not approved by anybody and not funded by anybody other than the U.S. taxpayer. People who see that kind of behavior that does not in any way take into account the thoughts, needs, or fundamental responsibilities to others. People who see this behavior as something to aspire to admire the leader of the Trump administration. We know now through our years of experiencing him that many millions of people support this kind of behavior, and I only mention the demolishing of the White House grounds as one example of thousands because I saw a photo earlier this morning of the pre-demolished grounds versus the demolished grounds, and it is quite stunning because you know that it is only looking like that because of the will of one person who is interested in either getting their way or getting no way. Remember when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars? What an asshole. There is nothing to it but to do it. Donald decided to demolish half of the White House, and he went ahead and did just that. Unfortunately, many among us who are damaged internally often express that damage externally, and it is up to that individual to either stop themselves or be stopped. And in America, that process happens through legislation and law enforcement, both of which have been moderately successful in some ways so far, including the leader of the Trump administration's name being stripped from the Kennedy Center, including his $1.776 billion slush fund being put on hold, and the litigation against this very construction project I am speaking of. I encourage all people to do it because there's nothing to it. But when you do it, consider how you might ruin your reputation. That's what people do who are ignoring the Trump administration. Day 391 of 1,461 days of ignoring the Trump administration. I am not a self-help guru. I'm just trying to help myself. I want to offer my congratulations to the New York Knickerbockers, also known as the New York Knicks. Of course, I am congratulating them for being up 2 in the NBA Finals. I followed the Knicks during the heyday of the Patrick Ewing, John Starks era, so it is very exciting to see. However, as you may have heard, the leader of the Trump administration, in an effort to make it all about himself, because that is what he lives for, is coming to New York to attend the game. And of course, that has caused all sorts of problems with security and dampened the spirits of fans who want to party outside of Madison Square Garden. But he does not care about that, because caring about that would require caring, and caring just ain't his bag, baby. Now, he will need his rest during the game. It is just 2 days after Donald had a giant meltdown/crash out in an interview with the journalist Kristen Welker, where she pressed him to provide evidence for his claims of fraud in the current California elections. If you didn't see it, he not only flipped out, threw off his microphone, and stepped on it on his struggle to stand up and storm out, but he had to quickly balance himself on Kristen's shoulder as he exited the room. But here he is, 2 days later, coming to New York to be pressed by a public that does not want him here. I have to believe that when the crowd tonight is vehemently shouting boo, that his handlers will say they are actually shouting douche, because they don't realize that douche is also a pejorative. It is a disgrace that the leader of the Trump administration must take this opportunity to disrupt celebrations in a city that does not want him, that did not want him, and that he is no longer even a resident of. But apparently, he is longing for old times when he could go across the street from Trump Tower to Bergdorf Goodman to grab him by the pee. Please note, this is not me accusing him of that, of course. This is me reminding you that a jury of 9 found him liable for sexual abuse. Anyway, I didn't mean to veer off the positivity that I was expressing about the New York Knicks and the potential they have to become NBA champions. We are all about mindfulness, optimism, and hope here, after all. I wish good luck for tonight to the entire Knicks organization and encourage them to ignore the Trump administration. Day 392 of 1,461 days of ignoring the Trump administration. I am not a self-help guru. I'm just trying to help myself. Say My Name is a song by Destiny's Child. And it is a song that comes to mind when I think about saying names, or more specifically today, not saying names, because we are not saying the name Donald Trump anymore when we say the John F. Kennedy Memorial Center for the Performing Arts. This is how we would like to say that name, and we are saying that name that way once again because in a very symbolic act in the middle of the night behind tarps that were put up in an attempt to shield the leader of the Trump administration from humiliation, his name was removed from said center. I understand why he had them put up scaffolding and tarps. It is because the fragile, very brittle, and as of tomorrow, very 80-year-old ego of the leader of the Trump administration could not deal with the public seeing such an obvious sign of his weakness. But this is not about, and never has been about, deriding the leader of the Trump administration. He opens himself up to that derision and does not need me or anyone else to point it out for him, although sometimes because I am human, I do. What it is about is how we are all surviving during this time. Because the leader of the Trump administration has subjected the population to so much more difficulty than we should ever have to deal with as productive members of society, seeing him suffer just a little is a coping mechanism that we employ in order to remember to be mindful, optimistic, and hopeful during a time when we are all being tested on a daily basis by a leader who seems set on only serving himself. Removing his name from a memorial building where it does not belong, in a typeface that does not match what was already there, using grammar that makes no sense whatsoever, is going to subject the perpetrator to some just humiliation in order to stop saying his name and ignore the Trump administration. Day 393 of 1,461 days of ignoring the Trump administration. I am not a self-help guru. I'm just trying to help myself. Happy birthday, Mr. President. I bet you wish that Marilyn Monroe was around to sing to you like she did to President Kennedy, who ironically has a building in Washington, D.C. with his name on it today that does not have your name on it today. But anyway, instead of Marilyn Monroe or some other blonde woman who you would likely disrespect singing happy birthday to you, you will have instead very bulky men in a cage who will be honoring your presence at an event on the White House lawn presented by the UFC. I think this is an incredibly glorious way to celebrate your birthday, Mr. President. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if some of you may wonder, what the hell would you find about that that is glorious, Josh? Have you lost your mind? Well, I find it glorious because I find it incredibly stupid, and I love stupidity. I feel that this particular situation we are in right now with the Trump administration dictates that we must suffer through the most stupid period of our existence in order to truly understand what stupid really is. I believe you cannot truly understand anything without having some personal knowledge of it, even if it is a subject you may not want to know about. I didn't even know what UFC even stood for until recently, but knowing now has been enlightening. I now know the leader of the Trump administration will be celebrating his 80th birthday with oiled, muscled men fighting each other to win his approval and applause, and I frankly cannot think of something more hideous, ridiculous, and as stated, plain old stupid. Yesterday, I thought about how dumb it was that he put his name on a building where it didn't belong. Then I thought about how he recently said that, quote, most people don't know that dumb has a B in it. What's next? Who knows? Perhaps the leader will be invited into the ring to experience some same-sex penetration. That would be silly, but I wouldn't know, because I'll be ignoring the Trump administration. Day 394 of 1,461 days of ignoring the Trump administration. I am not a self-help guru. I'm just trying to help myself. You might not believe what I am about to say. I love the leader. I know that you probably are wondering right now, oh, okay, Josh has suffered some kind of catastrophic brain injury. Well, please stay with me for a moment, and if you are someone thinking you have recruited me to your side, I also ask you to please not get your hopes up. In fact, you should get your fingers ready to type the same comment I delete a dozen times a day. You're not ignoring him. Good boy. The reason I love the leader of the Trump administration is because I love the elderly. There's an innocence about them because they know that their time here is coming closer to an end, and therefore they feel that letting their grip on life loosen is only obvious. I see this with the leader of the Trump administration. He is desperately trying to assert himself, as he has known himself to do throughout the course of his lifetime, of acting in a way that is in absolute accordance with the lens that was placed in front of his eyes at birth. The innocence that a young child looks at the world with before they are corrupted is the most beautiful aspect of existence that nothing can replace. Innocence is pure beauty, And I do believe at one time the leader of the Trump administration had that wide eyed innocence, kind of like a figure in those Big Eyes paintings. Have you ever seen the film about Big Eyes, starring Amy Adams and Christoph Waltz? It's decent, maybe a 7.2. I sure do love Christoph Waltz. But anyway, the leader of the Trump administration grew up in a family that I do not believe provided him with the kind of love that an innocent child needs in order to grow into an adult that doesn't become the leader of the Trump administration. There is tragedy around the leader, after all. His brother drank himself to death, and I do not say that lightly. People do not drink themselves to death unless they want to be dead. I have some understanding of this personally. I was never a drinker, but I have had addictions in my life, and if I had continued down that path, I would not be speaking to you right now. That's for sure. Like I said, for these reasons, I love the leader of the Trump administration, but I absolutely hate his behavior, and I will not revise my evaluation. But I will continue to ignore the Trump administration. Day 395 of 1,461 days of ignoring the Trump administration. I am not a self-help guru. I'm just trying to help myself. Today's episode is brought to you by the color green and the word algae. My favorite color is green. It always has been. I have hazel green eyes. Maybe that's why. I don't know if you're aware, but green eyes are the least common color of eyes. So, with that brief explanation, I hope you know more about me. I am attached to the color green, but not like Kermit the Frog sang about being green. I am much more of an Oscar the Grouch type, and as such, there is a scenario where I am not a fan of green. That is when it comes to reflecting pools. Now, I don't often think of reflecting pools, but recently I have been given a reason to think about reflecting pools, specifically the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool, and how that relates to the color green. You see, green is the color of our word of the day, algae. Algae is a word that probably isn't bandied around very often, but it has been lately because the leader of the Trump administration took on another taxpayer-funded, ridiculous vanity project that sealed the bottom of the reflecting pool, which effectively made the porous granite no longer porous. What happens when the water cannot naturally filtrate? You guessed it, green algae. Now, while we're discussing vocabulary, we might as well examine the inherent irony of the word reflecting, because that word has relevance in the life of the leader of the Trump administration, too. Its relevance is in just how extraordinarily irrelevant it is. Self-reflection is not something that I believe that the leader of the Trump administration partakes in. In fact, he once told a biographer that he does not like to analyze himself because he might not like what he sees. I get it, bro. Good call. In my opinion, that is his main character flaw among many. He does not think about the consequences of his actions and how they affect anyone but him, and that is how we have found ourselves with a leader who destroys national monuments. Thank you for being here to enjoy my little green algae conversation. Please continue to ignore the Trump administration. Day 396 of 1,461 days of ignoring the Trump administration. I am not a self-help guru, and I'm just trying to help myself. Day 396 represents the 27% mark in the 1,461 days of ignoring the Trump administration. As always, I like to use these milestones to remind us both what we are doing here. The order of the day is mindfulness, optimism, and hope.
The more we are aware of the attempts to undermine our resolve and divide our community by the leader of the Trump administration and the Trump administration, the more optimism and hope we can maintain in our minds and hearts. The less attention we pay to the unending messages fed to us by the mainstream news, the more time we have for ourselves and our loved ones. It's as simple as that. But there is something about the number 27 that is not so simple. So many people who I consider cultural icons left active life at the age of 27. I think of Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, and Kurt Cobain, but there are so many more. So many that the age of 27 is considered a curse in the artistic community. These people left by their own hand in one way or another, and they did so because this world didn't give them what they wanted. They were not yet to a point in their lives where they could harness mindfulness to help them maintain optimism and hope for better days. The leader of the Trump administration has life experiences and experience that I do not have. But that fact does not change what he fundamentally lacks in his character, and therefore what fundamentally makes us different. What I see is a man who does not feel the world gives him what he wants, and therefore does not want anyone in the world to get what they want. In that way, I am sad for him as a person who suffers, but that suffering does not excuse his failings as a person. Life is beautiful, but not for everyone and not all the time, but ultimately it is, and it's ours to see that way if we choose. Just like it's ours to leave if we choose. I choose mindfulness, optimism, and hope, even when it takes dedication, even if it means ignoring the Trump administration.
Hi, it's Josh. I'm back. It's pretty dark for me to take the celebration of 27% and turn it into a meditation on dead rock stars. Yes, the truth is, I was thinking of doing that for a very long time. Remember, I am the same guy who notices a paint chip on the wall of a YouTube chef who likely has a very full life. I believe in order to be the most self-actualized people we can be, there is the inevitability of embracing the most bizarre qualities of our character. Here we are. Thanks again for listening. Please leave a 5-star rating or review for the 1,461 Days of Ignoring with Josh Bloom podcast in your podcast player, and leave a comment saying you like the show. If you feel like leaving a comment about the leader of the Trump administration that says something like, "Holy shit, this guy is the largest liar I have ever known in my lifetime, both in size and in practice," then you go right ahead and you do that. Please tell a politically curious friend about the show, and while you are at it, please follow me on all of my social media by going to superjews.com, that's superjews.com, where you will find the links that you are looking for. If you would like to throw some support to me and the show, please subscribe to my Substack. Go to superjews.substack.com and just enter your email address. I would appreciate that immensely. A link is in the show notes. You can also buy me a coffee. For a mere $3, you will earn my undying gratitude, or at least enough gratitude to last until the next time I ask you to buy me a coffee. Go to buymeacoffee.com/Josh Bloom. Lastly, my book about psych-pop icons and Elephant Six co-founding band, The Apples in Stereo, is also available now. Choose your preferred bookseller at applesbook.com. We are living in trying times that are trying to take our time away from living. My reason for doing this show is to remain mindful, optimistic, and hopeful so I can reclaim that time, regain my mind, and focus on what is important. I am not a self-help guru. I'm just trying to help myself. See you next time. Bye.